Sometimes the worst betrayals come not from strangers, but from the person sleeping next to you every night. 26-year-old Kathy Barnes thought she knew her husband. She thought their 3-year marriage was solid, built on love, trust, and shared dreams. She was wrong. What happened to Kathy during the most vulnerable moment of her life would shatter everything she believed about love, loyalty, and the man she called her soulmate. This is her story, a story that began with a medical emergency and ended with a discovery that would change her life forever.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Kathy Barnes had always been the type of person who saw the glass as half full. At 26, she possessed an infectious optimism that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Her colleagues at Henderson Marketing Solutions in downtown Phoenix often remarked how she could turn even the most stressful campaign deadline into something manageable with her encouraging smile and "we've got this" attitude. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthdays, who brought homemade cookies to office meetings, and who genuinely believed that everything happened for a reason. Her husband, Marcus Barnes, seemed to be her perfect complement. At 29, Marcus worked as a software engineer for a tech startup called Data Flow Innovations, and his quiet, analytical nature balanced Kathy's bubbly personality beautifully. They'd met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue in Tempe, where Kathy had been attempting to rescue a conversation about quantum physics that was putting half the party to sleep. Marcus had watched amused as she somehow turned the discussion into an engaging debate about whether time travel movies were scientifically accurate. By the end of the evening, he was completely charmed. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of hiking trips in Sedona, late-night conversations about their dreams, and the kind of easy compatibility that made other couples envious. Marcus proposed on a sunset hot air balloon ride over the Sonoran Desert, and Kathy said yes before he'd even finished asking the question. Their wedding, held at a charming vineyard in Scottsdale, had been everything Kathy dreamed of: intimate, meaningful, and filled with the promise of a lifetime together. For 3 years, they'd built what Kathy considered an ideal life. They'd bought a modest but beautiful craftsman-style home in the historic Willow District, with a front porch perfect for morning coffee, and a backyard where they planned to eventually install a swing set for the children they both wanted. Marcus had his home office in the converted spare bedroom, while Kathy had claimed the sunroom as her creative space, where she worked on freelance graphic design projects and practiced watercolor painting on weekends. Their routines were comfortable and loving. Marcus would wake up first, brewing coffee in their French press and leaving Kathy's favorite mug, a quirky ceramic piece shaped like a camera that she'd bought on their honeymoon in Portland, filled and waiting on her nightstand. She'd reciprocate by packing his lunch, always including a little note with inside jokes or reminders of evening plans. They'd text throughout their workdays, sharing funny observations or photos of interesting things they encountered. Evenings were spent cooking together, binge-watching Netflix series, or taking walks around their neighborhood, discussing everything from work gossip to their 5-year plan. To anyone looking from the outside, Marcus and Kathy Barnes were the picture of marital bliss. Their social media was filled with hiking photos, date night selfies, and anniversary posts that made their friends comment with heart emojis and relationship goals captions. Kathy's mother, Patricia Williams, often told her friends that she'd never seen her daughter happier, while Marcus's parents frequently mentioned how Kathy had brought out a lighter, more social side in their previously reserved son. But as Kathy would later learn, the most devastating betrayals often come wrapped in the most ordinary moments. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in early March. Kathy had woken up feeling slightly off, nothing dramatic, just a persistent headache and an unusual fatigue that her usual morning coffee couldn't shake. Marcus had already left for an early meeting at Dataflow, so she'd gotten ready for work alone, attributing her sluggishness to the long hours she'd been putting in on the Morrison Electronics campaign. At Henderson, Kathy tried to power through her tasks, but by noon, the headache had intensified into something that felt like someone was driving nails through her skull. Her colleague and closest friend, Jessica Chen, noticed her wincing at her computer screen. "Kath, you look awful," Jessica said, perching on the edge of Kathy's desk. "Maybe you should head home." "I'm fine," Kathy insisted. though even she could hear how weak her voice sounded. "Just need some ibuprofen and maybe some fresh air." But as the afternoon wore on, the pain became unbearable. When Kathy tried to stand to walk to the bathroom, the room spun violently and she had to grab her desk to keep from falling. Jessica immediately called their supervisor, Linda Morrison, who took one look at Kathy's pale, sweating face and insisted on driving her to the emergency room at Phoenix General Hospital. "Marcus is in meetings all afternoon," Kathy explained weakly as Jessica helped her into Linda's car. "I don't want to worry him over nothing. It's probably just a migraine." But it wasn't just a migraine. After hours of tests, blood work, and a CT scan, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez delivered news that made Kathy's world tilt on its axis. She had developed a rare but serious condition called idiopathic intracranial hypertension, essentially dangerous pressure building around her brain that required immediate treatment and close monitoring. "We need to admit you for at least 3 to 4 days, Dr. Rodriguez explained gently. "We'll start you on medication to reduce the pressure, but this condition can be unpredictable. I want to make sure you're stable before we send you home." By the time Marcus arrived at the hospital, summoned by Linda's urgent call, Kathy was already settled in a private room on the 4th floor, an IV line in her arm and monitors beeping softly around her. She expected him to rush to her side, to hold her hand and reassure her that everything would be okay. Instead, Marcus seemed oddly detached, standing by the window rather than by her bed. "The doctor says it's not life-threatening," Kathy said, trying to bridge the strange distance she sensed. "Just need to get the pressure down and then I'll be home by the weekend." "Yeah, that's good," Marcus replied, but his attention seemed focused on his phone rather than her words. "Listen, I should probably head home and get some things sorted out. Maybe pack you a bag with more comfortable clothes."
That would be great, Kathy smiled, relieved that he was thinking practically. "Could you bring my phone charger? And maybe that soft gray sweater from the closet." "Sure, no problem." Marcus finally approached the bed and gave her a quick, almost perfunctory kiss on the forehead. "Get some rest, okay? I'll see you tomorrow." As her husband left, Kathy felt a strange unease settle in her chest, something beyond the physical discomfort of her condition. Marcus had seemed almost relieved, but that couldn't be right. She was probably just reading too much into things because of the medication and stress. Over the next 3 days, Marcus's visits became increasingly brief and sporadic. He'd arrived with explanations about work emergencies, important meetings, or household tasks that needed his immediate attention. Each time, he'd stay for maybe 30 minutes, making small talk, but never really engaging with what she was going through. He didn't bring the sweater she'd requested, claiming he couldn't find it, though it hung in the same spot in their closet for 2 years. Jessica visited every day after work, bringing magazines, Kathy's favorite smoothies from the juice bar near their office, and updates on the Morrison campaign. During one of these visits, Jessica casually mentioned something that struck Kathy as odd. "I tried calling your house phone last night to check on you, but it went straight to voicemail," Jessica said, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair. "Is Marcus screening calls or something?" "That's weird," Kathy frowned. "We never turn the ringer on that phone. Marcus uses it for work calls sometimes when his cell reception is spotty." "Maybe he was just sleeping heavily?" Jessica suggested, but Kathy could see the concern in her friend's eyes. That night, Kathy tried calling their home number from her hospital phone. It rang once and went to our answering machine. Not the behavior of a phone that was simply turned off or unplugged. Someone had deliberately set it to forward calls immediately to voicemail. When she asked Marcus about it during his brief visit the next day, he shrugged it off. "Oh, I've been getting a bunch of spam calls lately. Probably just forgot to turn the screening off." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way he avoided eye contact while giving it made Kathy's stomach knot with anxiety. On Thursday afternoon, Dr. Rodriguez delivered the news Kathy had been hoping for. Her intracranial pressure had responded well to the medication, and she would be discharged Friday morning. "You'll need to take it easy for a few weeks," the doctor cautioned.
no strenuous activity, and you'll need to come back for follow-up appointments to make sure the pressure stays down. Do you have someone at home who can help you during your recovery? Yes, my husband will take care of me, Kathy said automatically, though as the words left her mouth, she realized she wasn't entirely certain that was true. Marcus had seemed so distant during her stay, so unlike the caring, attentive man she'd married. That evening, Kathy called Marcus with the good news about her discharge. His response was not what she expected. Tomorrow? Are you sure the doctor said tomorrow? His voice carried a strange tension she couldn't identify. Yes, first thing in the morning, around 9 o'clock, Kathy replied, confused by his tone. Aren't you happy? I get to come home. Of course I'm happy. It's just, I have this important presentation at work tomorrow. I might not be able to pick you up until later in the day. That's okay. Jessica already offered to drive me home. You don't need to change your work schedule. I tried to keep the hurt out of my voice. After 4 days in the hospital, she'd hoped her husband would want to be there for her homecoming. Great, that works out perfectly then. I'll see you at home later. And she could swear she heard relief in his voice. As Friday morning arrived, Kathy found herself both excited and apprehensive about going home. The young woman who had entered Phoenix General 4 days ago had been blissfully unaware that her marriage was anything other than perfect. The woman preparing to leave had a growing collection of small doubts and unanswered questions that she couldn't quite shake. Jessica arrived promptly at 9 with a travel mug of Kathy's favorite coffee and a cheerful demeanor that helped lift her friend's spirits. Ready to get out of this place? Jessica asked, helping Kathy gather her few belongings. More than ready, though she wondered what exactly she was going home to. As they drove through the familiar streets of Phoenix toward the Willow District, Kathy felt a mixture of anticipation and dread she couldn't explain. She was going home to her husband, to her beautiful house, to the life she'd built and loved. So why did she feel like she was driving towards something that would change everything? The answer was waiting for her at 2847 Cypress Street, though she didn't know it yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The drive home from Phoenix General Hospital should have been a celebration. After 4 days of medical uncertainty, tests, and uncomfortable hospital beds, Kathy Barnes was finally returning to her sanctuary, the craftsman-style home she and Marcus had lovingly restored over the past 2 years. As Jessica's Honda Civic turned onto Cypress Street, Kathy felt her spirits lift at the sight of their neighborhood's familiar tree-lined streets and well-maintained front yards. "Look, Mrs. Henderson is working in her garden again," Kathy observed, waving at their elderly neighbor who was tending to her prize-winning roses. "I should bake her some of those lemon bars she loves once I'm feeling better." Jessica smiled at her friend's immediate return to caretaking mode. "Maybe focus on taking care of yourself first, Kath. Doctor's orders, remember?" As they pulled into the driveway of 2847 Cypress Street, Kathy felt a surge of genuine happiness. The house looked exactly as she'd left it. The front porch swing where she and Marcus spent Sunday mornings, the small herb gardens she'd planted by the kitchen window, and the cheerful yellow door she'd convinced Marcus to paint despite his preference for something more conservative. "Home, sweet home," she murmured, gathering her hospital bag and the small bouquet of flowers Jessica had bought to welcome her back. Jessica helped her up the front steps, chattering about work updates and office gossip to keep Kathy's spirits up. "Oh, and Linda said to take all the time you need to recover. The Morrison campaign is ahead of schedule anyway, thanks to all your prep work." Kathy reached into her purse for her house key, a small silver key attached to a keychain shaped like a tiny camera, matching her favorite coffee mug. It was one of those small details that made her feel connected to Marcus, since he'd bought both items during their Portland honeymoon. She inserted the key into the lock and turned it. Nothing happened. "That's weird," Kathy said, frowning. She pulled the key out and examined it, then tried again. The key wouldn't turn at all, not even the slight resistance she'd expect from a stubborn lock.
It was as if the key no longer belonged to this door. "Maybe it's just stuck," Jessica suggested, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. Kathy tried a third time, applying more pressure, but the key remained completely immobile in the lock. A cold feeling began to creep up her spine. Not the medical kind of cold she'd experienced at the hospital, but something deeper and more unsettling. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my key. This is my house." Jessica moved closer, examining the lock. "Kath, this looks like a different lock entirely. See how the metal finish is shinier than your door hardware?" The observation hit Kathy like a physical blow. Jessica was right. The deadbolt lock was clearly newer than the rest of the door hardware. While our original lock had been an antique brass finish that matched the house's 1920s character, this new lock was bright chrome and obviously recently installed. "Marcus changed the locks," Kathy said, the words feeling surreal as they left her mouth. "He locked me out. Marcus locked me out of my own home." Jessica immediately pulled out her phone. "Let's call him, right now. There has to be an explanation." Kathy nodded numbly and dialed Marcus's cell phone number with trembling fingers. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His voice, so familiar and yet now somehow foreign, delivered his standard message. "Hi, you've reached Marcus Barnes. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." "Marcus, it's me," Kathy said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I'm home from the hospital, but my key doesn't work. The lock is different. Please call me back immediately." She hung up and immediately tried again. This time, the call went straight to voicemail without ringing at all. He'd either turned off his phone or was actively declining her calls. "Let's try the back door," Jessica suggested, though her optimism was clearly forced. They walked around to the backyard, past the small patio where Kathy and Marcus had shared countless evening barbecues and morning coffees. The back door, which led into their kitchen, had also been fitted with a new lock, the same shiny chrome finish as the front door. Kathy's spare key, hidden under a decorative rock by the back steps, was also useless. "The windows," Kathy said desperately, moving toward the kitchen window she'd left slightly open for ventilation before leaving for work on that Tuesday morning. But as she approached, she could see that all the windows were not only closed, but appeared to have additional security latches installed. Jessica walked the perimeter of the house, checking each window and door. "Kath, every single entry point has been secured. This wasn't some impulsive decision. This was planned and thorough." The reality of her situation began to crash over Kathy in waves. She wasn't just locked out of her house. She was deliberately locked out by the man who had promised to love and cherish her, who had vowed to be her partner through sickness and health. The man who had seemed so distant during her hospital stay, whose visits had grown shorter and less frequent each day. "I need to sit down," Kathy said, her legs suddenly feeling unsteady. Jessica guided her to the porch swing, the same swing where Kathy had dreamed about their future children, where she and Marcus had made plans for home improvements and discussed their hopes for expanding their family. "Let me try calling him," Jessica offered. Pulling out her own phone, she dialed Marcus's, and it rang normally.
"Hi, Jessica," Marcus answered on the third ring, his voice casual and friendly. "What's up?" "Marcus, Kathy is home from the hospital and can't get into the house. What's going on with the locks?" There was a pause, long enough for Kathy to hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "Is she there with you now?" Marcus asked. "Yes, she's right here. Marcus, she's really upset and confused." Another pause. When Marcus spoke again, his tone had shifted to something Kathy had never heard from him before. Cold, distant, almost administrative. "Tell Kathy I need some space to think. I'll call her later." "What space to think about what?" Jessica pressed. "Marcus, your wife was in the hospital for 4 days with a serious condition. She needs to come home and rest." "I said I'll call her later," Marcus repeated, and then the line went dead. Jessica stared at her phone in disbelief before looking at Kathy, who had gone completely pale. "He hung up on you," Kathy said,
her voice hollow. "My husband hung up when you told him I was locked out of my own home." The afternoon sun, which had seemed so welcoming when they'd first arrived, now felt harsh and exposing. Neighbors were beginning to notice the two women sitting on the porch with luggage, clearly unable to enter the house. Mrs. Henderson had stopped her gardening and was watching with obvious concern from across the street. "Kathy, honey, you can't stay out here," Jessica said gently. "Come stay at my place while we figure this out." But Kathy wasn't ready to leave. This was her home, filled with 3 years of memories, her belongings, her life. The sunroom held her art supplies and the paintings she'd been working on. The bedroom contained her clothes, her jewelry, photos of her family. The kitchen held the ceramic dishes they'd received as wedding gifts, the cookbook collection she'd built over years of trying new recipes for Marcus. "What did I do wrong?" Kathy asked, tears finally beginning to fall. "Jessica, what could I possibly have done to deserve this? I was in the hospital. I was sick." Jessica wrapped her arms around her friend, feeling helpless in the face of such inexplicable cruelty. "You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing about this is your fault." As they sat on the swing, Kathy tried to process what had happened during her hospital stay. She thought about Marcus's strange behavior, his shortened visits, his apparent relief when she'd told him Jessica would drive her home. Had he been planning this the entire time she was lying in that hospital bed, worried about brain pressure and medication schedules? Had he spent those 4 days not worrying about her health, but planning how to lock her out of their shared life? "The spare key," Kathy said suddenly, remembering something. "He knew exactly where I kept the spare key, and he knew my schedule, knew that Jessica was bringing me home this morning. He made sure he wouldn't be here to face me." Jessica pulled out her phone again. "I'm calling him back." "No," Kathy said firmly, wiping her tears. "If Marcus wants space to think, then he can have all the space he wants, but I'm not going to beg him to let me into my own home." Even as she said the words, Kathy could feel something fundamentally shifting inside her. The woman who had entered the hospital on Tuesday had trusted completely, had believed in the fairy tale of her perfect marriage. The woman sitting on this porch swing was beginning to understand that the fairy tale had been built on foundations far shakier than she had ever imagined. "We need to get your things," Jessica said practically, "and we need to understand your legal rights here." Kathy nodded, though the thought of calling lawyers and dealing with legal rights felt surreal. A week ago, her biggest concern had been meeting the Morrison campaign deadline. Now she was potentially facing divorce proceedings, property disputes, and the complete dismantling of the life she had built. Her phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. Maybe Marcus had come to his senses. Maybe he was reaching out to explain and apologize. But the message wasn't from Marcus. It was from her mother, Patricia. "Hi, sweetheart. Marcus called to let me know you're home from the hospital. Hope you're feeling better. Can't wait to hear all about your recovery when you're up for a long chat. Love you." Kathy stared at the message, a new kind of pain settling in her chest. Marcus had called her mother, but not to explain that he'd changed the locks or that their marriage was in crisis. He had called to maintain the pretense that everything was normal, that he was a caring husband looking after his recovering wife. The deception was breathtaking in its calculation. "He's been lying to everyone," Kathy said, showing Jessica the text. "While he was locking me out of my house, he was calling my mom to play the concerned husband role." Jessica read the message, her expression growing increasingly angry. "Kathy, this isn't just cruel, it's manipulative on a level I can't even comprehend." As the afternoon wore on, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The spam calls Marcus claimed were the reason for changing the phone settings, his knowledge that Jessica would be bringing Kathy home, eliminating any chance of an unexpected confrontation. His absence from the house today, ensuring he wouldn't have to face her when she discovered what he'd done. Everything had been orchestrated. While Kathy was lying in a hospital bed, receiving IV medications and worrying about her health, Marcus had been systematically planning her exclusion from their shared life. The betrayal was complete, calculated, and devastating. But as the sun began to set over Kuiper Street, casting long shadows across the porch where Kathy had once felt so safe and loved, Marcus had made one critical miscalculation. He had assumed that locking her out would break her. Instead, it was going to reveal just how strong she really was.
Jessica Chen's apartment in the Arcadia neighborhood had always been Kathy's refuge during girls' nights and weekend brunches, but sleeping on her best friend's couch felt like inhabiting an alternate reality. As dawn broke over Phoenix on Saturday morning, Kathy lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through the events of the previous day. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that shiny new lock, heard Marcus's cold voice telling Jessica he needed space to think. "Coffee's ready," Jessica called softly from the kitchen, having learned to recognize the sounds of Kathy's restless mornings over the past week. Kathy shuffled into Jessica's bright, modern kitchen, so different from her own cozy space with its vintage appliances and herb garden view. Everything here reminded her of what she'd lost, or rather what had been taken from her. "I called in sick to work," Jessica announced, setting down a steaming mug. "We have things to figure out today." "Jess, you can't keep missing work because of my disaster," Kathy protested, though she felt tremendous relief at not having to face this alone. "My best friend's husband locked her out of her own home while she was recovering from a brain condition. I think Linda will understand if I take a personal day." As they sat at Jessica's small dining table, Kathy's phone remained stubbornly silent. No calls from Marcus, no text messages, no explanation for the inexplicable. It had been 18 hours since he'd hung up on Jessica, and his silence felt as deliberate as everything else he'd done. "I keep thinking there has to be more to this story," Kathy said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug for warmth, despite the Arizona heat already building outside. "People don't just change overnight. There had to be signs I missed." Jessica pulled out a legal pad she'd grabbed from her home office. "Let's think through this systematically. When did you first notice Marcus acting differently?" "The hospital visit," Kathy said immediately. "But now that I'm really thinking about it, maybe it started earlier. He'd been working late more often over the past month, said it was a big project at Dataflow. Did you ever call him at work during those late nights?" Kathy paused, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. "Actually, I tried to a few times. His office phone would go to voicemail, and when I'd ask him about it the next day, he'd say he was in conference rooms or working in different parts of the building." Jessica wrote this down. "What about his behavior at home? Any changes in routine, new habits, anything unusual?" "He started going for runs in the evenings," Kathy said slowly, the memories becoming clearer as he focused on them. "Marcus hated running, used to joke that he'd only run if something was chasing him. But about 6 weeks ago, he suddenly started going out for hour-long runs almost every night." "Where did he say he was running?" "The trail system in Papago Park. Said he was trying to get in better shape." Kathy set down her mug with more force than necessary. "God, how stupid was I? A man who's been sedentary for 3 years doesn't suddenly become a marathon enthusiast." Jessica reached across the table and squeezed Kathy's hand. "You weren't stupid. You trusted your husband. That's what you're supposed to do in a marriage." "But that's just it," Kathy said, her voice growing stronger. "I trusted him completely, but he's been lying to me for weeks, maybe months. While I was worrying about campaign deadlines and planning our upcoming anniversary dinner, he was, planning to abandon me?" The anniversary dinner. Kathy had made reservations at the Phoenicians restaurant for the following weekend, their 4th wedding anniversary. She'd been excited to surprise Marcus with the booking at the upscale resort where they'd celebrated their 1st anniversary. The reservation was still in her phone calendar, a painful reminder of how differently she'd imagined this month playing out. "We need to understand what Marcus has been really doing," Jessica said, her tone shifting to the decisive, problem-solving voice Kathy recognized from their work brainstorming sessions. "And we need to protect your interests." "What do you mean?" "Kathy, you're not just dealing with a personal betrayal here. You're potentially dealing with financial fraud, property theft, and who knows what else. If Marcus has been planning this for weeks, what else has he been doing during that time?" The thought sent a chill through Kathy. Their joint bank accounts, their shared credit cards, the house deed, their savings account. Marcus had access to everything, just as she did. It had never occurred to her to monitor his financial activities because she'd never had reason to distrust him. "I need to check our accounts." Kathy reached for her phone. The first discovery was their joint checking account. The balance, which should have been around $8,400, based on their last conversation about finances, showed $1,247. Nearly $7,000 was missing from their primary account. "Jessica," Kathy whispered, her hands beginning to shake again, "he's been taking money."
They logged into their savings account next. Their carefully built emergency fund, which had taken them 3 years to accumulate, was completely empty. $23,000 gone. Jessica moved to sit beside Kathy on the couch, looking over her shoulder at the devastating numbers on the phone screen. When was the last time you checked these accounts? 2 weeks ago? Maybe 3? We've always been so good about communicating about money. If one of us made a large purchase, we'd mention it. This isn't large purchases. This is systematic theft. The credit card statements told an even more disturbing story. Marcus had been making cash advances, small amount that wouldn't trigger alerts, but frequent enough that they added up to thousands of dollars over the past month. He'd also made purchases Kathy didn't recognize, payments to a moving company, charges from a storage facility, fees for legal consultation services. He hired a lawyer, Kathy said, her voice barely audible. Marcus hired a divorce lawyer weeks ago and never said anything to me. Jessica pulled up the website for the law firm that appeared on their credit card statement. Peterson, Walsh & Associates, specialize in family law and divorce proceedings. Their website featured testimonials from clients praising their aggressive advocacy and strategic approach to asset protection. He's been planning to divorce me since before I got sick, Kathy realized. The hospital stay wasn't what triggered this. It was just convenient timing for him. The full scope of Marcus's deception was becoming clear, and it was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. While Kathy was planning anniversary dinners and discussing their 5-year plan, Marcus had been consulting divorce attorneys and systematically moving their money. While she was lying in a hospital bed worried about brain pressure, he'd been changing locks and finalizing his exit strategy. We need to document everything, Jessica said, shifting into crisis management mode. Screenshot all these transactions, print the statements, gather any physical evidence you might need.
But Kathy's mind was spinning beyond financial concerns to more personal betrayals. Jessica, if he's been planning this for weeks, then everything has been a lie. Every I love you, every discussion about our future. Every time he comforted me about the headaches that led to my hospitalization, it was all performance. The psychological impact was almost worse than the financial theft. Kathy began to replay conversations from the past month with this new knowledge. Marcus holding her when she'd worried about her recurring headaches, assuring her it was probably just stress. Marcus discussing their summer vacation plans while simultaneously planning to abandon their marriage. Marcus making love to her while already consulting lawyers about divorce proceedings. I need to know what else he's been lying about, Kathy said, a new determination entering her voice. If he's been this deceptive about money and lawyers, what else has he been hiding? Jessica hesitated. Kath, are you sure you want to go down that road? Some information you can't unknow. I'm already living with the aftermath of his lies. I deserve to understand the full scope of what he's done. They started with social media, though Marcus had never been particularly active online. His Facebook profile showed no recent activity, and his Instagram account was mostly work-related posts and hiking photos. But when Jessica suggested checking LinkedIn, they found something interesting. Marcus's professional profile had been recently updated with a new location listed Denver, Colorado. Denver? Kathy stared at the screen in confusion. He's never mentioned anything about Denver. His company doesn't have offices there. A quick search revealed that Dataflow Innovations had indeed opened a new satellite office in Denver 3 months ago. Marcus had apparently applied for and accepted a transfer without ever mentioning it to his wife. He's not just leaving you, Jessica said quietly. He's leaving the state. The hits kept coming. Marcus's company directory listed his new start date at the Denver office as 2 weeks from now. He'd been planning to be gone before their anniversary, before Kathy had fully recovered from her medical condition, before any of the normal conversations that might precede such a massive life change. I need to call Dataflow, Kathy said, reaching for her phone. Wait, Jessica cautioned. Think about this strategically. If you call his company, it alerts them that there's marital discord. That could affect any legal proceedings. Legal proceedings. 2 days ago, Kathy's biggest legal concern was whether their homeowner's insurance covered water damage from their aging pipes. Now she was thinking about divorce lawyers and asset protection. I'm right, Kathy said, setting down her phone. But I need to know who else knew about this.
Marcus didn't plan this elaborate deception in a vacuum. They decided to drive by Dataflow's Phoenix office, not to confront anyone, but to gather information. The tech company occupied the third floor of a modern building in Scottsdale, and Kathy had attended their holiday party there just 4 months ago. She remembered chatting with Marcus's coworkers, laughing at their inside jokes, feeling proud to be part of his professional community. From Jessica's car in the parking lot, they watched employees coming and going during the lunch hour. Kathy recognized several of Marcus's coworkers, people who presumably knew about his transfer to Denver, while she remained completely in the dark. "There's Derek Morrison," Kathy said, pointing to a tall man with glasses heading toward the building entrance. Derek was Marcus's closest friend at work and had been a groomsman in their wedding. He knew. He had to have known. The realization that Marcus's betrayal extended beyond their marriage to include their entire social circle was another blow. How many people had known about Marcus's plans while Kathy continued planning their anniversary celebration? How many conversations had she had with mutual friends who were aware that her marriage was ending before she was? As they sat in the parking lot, Kathy's phone finally buzzed with a text message. For a split second, hope flared in her chest. Maybe Marcus was finally ready to explain, to talk, to work through whatever crisis had driven him to such extreme measures. But the message wasn't from Marcus. It was from Derek Morrison. "Hey, Kathy, just wanted to reach out and say I'm sorry about everything. Marcus asked me not to say anything, but I think you deserve to know that we're all rooting for you. If you need anything, let me know." The text confirmed what Kathy had suspected. Marcus's coworkers knew about the situation, which meant they'd known about his plans long before she did. But Derek's message also suggested something else. Not everyone approved of Marcus's methods. "I'm texting him back," Kathy decided. "If Derek wants to help, maybe he can fill in some blanks." 20 minutes later, Derek Morrison was sitting across from Kathy and Jessica at a quiet coffee shop near his office. His expression a mixture of guilt and genuine concern. "I should have warned you," he said immediately. "Marcus swore me to secrecy, said he needed to handle things his own way, but what he's done? This isn't the Marcus I thought I knew." "How long have you known?" Kathy asked. "About the Denver transfer? 2 months. About the divorce plans?" Derek paused, clearly uncomfortable. "He mentioned he was having doubts about the marriage about 6 weeks ago, but Kathy, I never imagined he'd handle it like this. Changing locks while you're in the hospital, taking money from your accounts. That's not just ending a marriage, that's, I don't even know what to call it." "Did he say why he wanted the divorce?" Derek shook his head. "That's what's been bothering me. Marcus never gave specific reasons, just said he felt trapped, that he needed to figure out who he was outside of the marriage. But he seemed almost excited about starting over, like this was some kind of adventure rather than the end of a 3-year marriage." The conversation with Derek lasted an hour and provided crucial information about Marcus's timeline and state of mind. But more importantly, it confirmed something Kathy had begun to suspect. This wasn't about her behavior, or anything she'd done wrong. This was about Marcus having what appeared to be some kind of midlife crisis at 29, and rather than working through it with his wife or seeking counseling, he'd chosen the cruelest possible method of escape. As they drove back to Jessica's apartment, Kathy felt something shifting inside her. The shock and devastation of the past 2 days were beginning to transform into something else. Anger, determination, and a growing resolve to fight back. Marcus might have planned his escape meticulously, but he'd made one crucial error in judgment. He'd underestimated the woman he was betraying.
Monday morning arrived with the harsh reality that Kathy Barnes needed to transform from a betrayed wife into a strategic fighter. As she sat in the waiting room of Martinez and Associates Family Law, she clutched a manila folder containing printouts of bank statements, credit card records, and screenshots that documented the systematic theft of her financial security. The law office, located in a prestigious building in downtown Phoenix, felt intimidating with its marble floors and expensive artwork. but Kathy had chosen attorney Rebecca Martinez specifically because of her reputation for aggressive representation of women in high-conflict divorces. "Mrs. Barnes?" A confident woman in her 40s appeared at the reception area. Rebecca Martinez was shorter than Kathy had expected, but her presence filled the room. "I'm Rebecca. Let's go discuss your situation." In Rebecca's office, surrounded by law books and framed certificates, Kathy found herself recounting the events of the past week to a stranger who would now become her advocate. Rebecca listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her experience with similar cases. "Let me be direct with you, Kathy," Rebecca said after reviewing the financial documents. "What your husband has done constitutes several potential crimes beyond the dissolution of marriage. We're looking at possible charges of theft, financial fraud, and abandonment. But first, we need to stop the bleeding." "What do you mean?" "He's had access to your accounts for weeks while planning this. We need to freeze everything immediately, establish temporary restraining orders, and file for emergency spousal support. How much money do you have access to right now?" The question hit Kathy like a physical blow. "About $400 in my personal checking account. Everything else was joint accounts that he emptied." Rebecca's expression hardened. This is financial abuse, and it's unfortunately more common than people realize. Men who plan strategic divorces often systematically drain accounts while their wives remain unaware. "We're going to fix this, but I need you to understand that your husband has essentially stolen your ability to survive independently." The legal terminology felt surreal. Financial abuse, strategic divorce, emergency support. A week ago, Kathy's biggest concern had been choosing a restaurant for their anniversary dinner. Now she was learning about legal concepts she'd never imagined would apply to her life. "The first thing we're doing today is filing an emergency motion for temporary orders," Rebecca explained, pulling forms from her desk drawer. "This will freeze all marital assets, require Marcus to maintain existing financial obligations like mortgage and insurance payments, and establish temporary spousal support so you can survive while we sort this out." "How long does that take?" "Emergency motions are typically heard within 72 hours. But Kathy, I need to prepare you for something. Your husband hired Peterson, Walsh, and Associates. They're known for scorched earth tactics. This isn't going to be a friendly, mediated divorce." As Rebecca explained the legal process, Kathy felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what lay ahead. Property division, spousal support calculations, asset discovery, forensic accounting. Her marriage was about to be dissected by lawyers and judges who would determine the financial value of 3 years of shared life. "There's something else we need to discuss," Rebecca said, her tone becoming more serious. "Based on the timeline you've described, Marcus has been planning this for months. That suggests premeditation that could work in our favor, but it also means he's likely taken steps we haven't discovered yet." "Like what?" "Hidden assets, transferred property, opened accounts in his name only. Men who plan divorces this strategically often move money to places their wives can't find it. We're going to need a forensic accountant to trace every financial transaction from the past 6 months." The cost of fighting back was becoming clear. Legal fees, accounting fees, court costs, expenses that Kathy couldn't afford because Marcus had stolen her access to money. It felt like a deliberately constructed trap. "How do I pay for all this if he's taken everything?" "We'll request that the court order Marcus to pay your legal fees as part of the emergency motion. It's standard in cases where one spouse has been financially disadvantaged by the other's actions." As they worked through the paperwork for the emergency filing, Rebecca asked questions that forced Kathy to examine her marriage with brutal honesty. Had there been any signs of Marcus transferring assets? Any unusual financial activities she'd dismissed? Any conversations about money that seemed odd in retrospect? "He insisted on handling our taxes this year. Usually we did them together, but he said his work situation was more complex and he'd take care of everything. I thought he was being helpful." Rebecca made a note. "We'll need copies of those tax returns. If he was planning a divorce, he might have structured the filing in ways that would benefit him in property division."
The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering every aspect of Kathy's financial life with Marcus: joint credit cards, the mortgage on their house, car loans, insurance policies, retirement accounts. Everything would need to be frozen, evaluated, and ultimately divided. The life they'd built together was about to become evidence in a legal proceeding. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Rebecca said as they prepared to file the paperwork. "I strongly recommend that you don't communicate directly with Marcus anymore. Everything should go through attorneys from this point forward." "But what if he tries to explain? What if he wants to work things out?" Rebecca's expression was kindly but firm. "Kathy, men who change locks while their wives are hospitalized and steal marital assets aren't looking to work things out. They're looking to win. From now on, you need to think like someone who's fighting for her future, not like someone trying to save a marriage." That afternoon, Kathy found herself at the Maricopa County Family Court, an imposing building where the most intimate details of failed relationships were reduced to legal documents and financial calculations. Rebecca filed their emergency motion, and they received a hearing date for Wednesday morning, just 2 days away. "Wednesday at 9 a.m. we'll be in front of Judge Patricia Williams. She's fair, but no nonsense. If our evidence is solid, she'll grant the temporary orders."
As they walked to the parking garage, Kathy's phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's name, and for a moment, her heart raced with the possibility that he was finally ready to explain, to apologize, to try to repair the damage he'd done. "Don't answer it," Rebecca advised. "Let it go to voicemail." But Kathy was already declining the call. The woman who might have answered desperately 3 days ago no longer existed. The woman walking out of family court had different priorities. Marcus called again immediately, then again. Rebecca watched Kathy's face as she declined each call without hesitation. "He knows," Rebecca said with satisfaction. "Someone tipped him off that you filed legal papers. He's probably panicking." The thought of Marcus panicking provided Kathy with her first moment of satisfaction since this nightmare began. For 4 days, he'd held all the power, controlling the narrative and the timeline of their marriage's destruction. Now, she was taking some of that power back. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Kathy, we need to talk. This legal stuff is unnecessary. Call me." She showed the message to Rebecca, who read it with a grim smile. Classic abuser language, minimizing the legal stuff as if stealing your money and locking you out of your home were minor misunderstandings. Don't respond. That evening, staying again at Jessica's apartment, Kathy felt the strange sensation of existing in limbo. She wasn't technically divorced, but her marriage was effectively over. She wasn't homeless, but she couldn't access her own home. She wasn't destitute, but her financial security had been deliberately destroyed by the person who'd promised to protect her. Jessica arrived home from work with Chinese takeout and updates from their office. "Linda wants you to know that your job is secure, and if you need to adjust your schedule for legal appointments, that's completely fine." The normalcy of work concerns felt bizarre given everything else happening, but Kathy realized she'd need to return to Henderson Marketing soon. She'd need the income, the routine, and the psychological benefit of focusing on something other than her imploding personal life. "I've been thinking about something Derek said yesterday," Kathy told Jessica as they ate dinner on the couch. "He mentioned that Marcus seemed excited about starting over, like it was an adventure. That bothers me more than almost anything else." "Why?" "Because it means he doesn't see me as a person he's hurting. I'm just an obstacle he had to navigate around to get to his new life. The cruelty wasn't personal, it was just the most efficient method to achieve his goal." Jessica set down her chopsticks and looked at her friends seriously. "Maybe that's actually a good thing." "How could that possibly be good?" "Because it means this isn't about you being inadequate or failing as a wife. This is about Marcus being fundamentally selfish and possibly sociopathic. You can't fix that, and you shouldn't blame yourself for not seeing it." As they talked, Kathy's phone continued buzzing with calls and texts from Marcus.
Each message grew more urgent, more demanding that she contact him immediately. But with each ignored communication, Kathy felt stronger and more certain of her decision to let the lawyers handle everything. Around 10 p.m., Jessica's doorbell rang unexpectedly. Both women froze, looking at each other with alarm. "Are you expecting anyone?" Kathy whispered. Jessica shook her head and moved quietly to the peephole. "Oh my God," she said, backing away from the door. "It's Marcus." Kathy's stomach dropped. Marcus had never been to Jessica's apartment before, which meant he'd somehow tracked down her address. The idea of him standing outside, probably angry that she wasn't answering his calls, made her feel trapped and vulnerable. The doorbell rang again, followed by insistent knocking. "Kathy, I know you're in there." Marcus's voice came through the door. "We need to talk. This legal action is ridiculous." Jessica was already on her phone with 911, explaining that her friend's estranged husband was at her door making demands after being told not to contact her directly. "Kathy, please," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a pleading tone she'd never heard before. "I never meant for things to happen this way. If you just answer your phone, we could work this out without lawyers." The manipulation was breathtaking. Marcus had spent weeks planning her financial ruin and personal humiliation, but now that she had fought back legally, he wanted to work things out on his terms. "Ma'am, we have officers en route," the 911 dispatcher told Jessica. "Keep your doors locked and don't engage with him." Within minutes, they could hear police officers outside, talking to Marcus in firm but professional tones. Through Jessica's window, they watched as Marcus gestured animatedly, probably trying to explain that this was just a marital misunderstanding. After about 20 minutes, the knocking stopped, and Jessica received a call from one of the officers explaining that Marcus had been advised not to return to the property and that they documented the incident in case Kathy needed a restraining order. "This changes everything," Kathy said after the police left. "He's not just trying to abandon our marriage quietly. He's trying to control how it ends." But as she thought about Marcus's desperate attempt to bypass her lawyer and manipulate her into direct communication, Kathy realized something important. He was scared. For the first time since he changed those locks, Marcus wasn't in complete control of the situation, and that meant her legal strategy was working. Wednesday morning's court hearing couldn't come too soon.
Wednesday morning at the Maricopa County Family Court felt like stepping into a battlefield where the weapons were legal briefs and the casualties were measured in dollars and dignity. Kathy Barnes sat beside Rebecca Martinez in courtroom 4B, wearing her most professional Navy suit and trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Across the aisle, Marcus sat with his attorney, Thomas Peterson, from Peterson, Walsh & Associates, a silver-haired man whose expensive suit and cold demeanor made him look like he'd stepped out of a corporate boardroom rather than a family court. This was the first time Kathy had seen Marcus since he disappeared during her hospital stay, and the sight of him hit her with unexpected force. He looked different. Not just the obvious tension in his shoulders or the way he avoided eye contact, but something fundamental had changed in his appearance. His hair was styled differently, more modern and trendy. He was wearing a suit she'd never seen before, clearly expensive and tailored. Even his posture seemed different, more confident and self-assured than the Marcus she'd known. "He's dressed for his new life," Kathy whispered to Rebecca, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Rebecca glanced across the aisle and nodded grimly. Classic behavior. He's already moved on psychologically, but that attitude is going to work against him with Judge Williams. Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom precisely at 9 a.m., her black robes and no-nonsense expression commanding immediate respect. Kathy had researched the judge online and learned that Williams had built a reputation for protecting financially disadvantaged spouses and showing little patience for tactical maneuvers designed to harm the other party. "We're here for emergency motions in the matter of Barnes versus Barnes," Judge Williams announced, settling behind her bench. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Mr. Peterson, your client has some explaining to do." Thomas Peterson stood with practiced smoothness.
Your Honor, my client, Mr. Barnes, maintains that his actions were within his legal rights as a joint account holder and homeowner. The temporary separation was necessary for both parties to evaluate their marriage with clear heads. By changing the locks while his wife was hospitalized, Judge Williams's tone suggested she was not impressed with this argument. Your Honor, Mr. Barnes was acting on advice of counsel to protect marital assets during a period of marital uncertainty. Rebecca Martinez rose from her seat. Your Honor, if I may address the timeline issue. Mr. Barnes began systematically draining marital accounts and consulting divorce attorneys 6 weeks before his wife was even hospitalized. This wasn't protective action. This was calculated financial abuse designed to leave Mrs. Barnes destitute and homeless. Judge Williams turned to the stack of financial documents Rebecca had submitted. Mr. Peterson, I'm looking at $23,000 withdrawn from savings accounts, $7,000 from checking accounts, and multiple cash advances on joint credit cards, all while Mrs. Barnes was unaware that divorce was being contemplated. How exactly does your client justify this? Kathy watched Marcus whisper urgently to his attorney. Even from across the aisle, she could see sweat beading on his forehead, despite the courtroom's air conditioning. Your Honor, Peterson replied, my client was concerned about potential vindictive actions from Mrs. Barnes once divorce proceedings began. He was protecting assets that he helped accumulate during the marriage. Protecting assets from whom? From his wife of 3 years who was lying in a hospital bed with a serious medical condition? Mr. Peterson, your client didn't protect assets. He stole them. The judge's words hung in the air like a verdict. Kathy felt Rebecca's hand briefly touch her arm in a gesture of encouragement. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, I'm troubled by the timing of these actions. Mr. Barnes waited until his wife was medically incapacitated to execute his plan. That's not just strategic, it's cruel and potentially criminal. Marcus's face had gone pale, and I could see him tugging at his tie nervously. This wasn't going according to whatever plan he and his expensive attorney had devised. Rebecca stood again. Your Honor, we're requesting immediate restoration of Mrs. Barnes' access to marital assets, temporary spousal support of $4,000 per month, with the first payment due within a week. We also request that Mr. Barnes be required to provide keys to the marital home to Mrs. Barnes within 24 hours, as she has every legal right to reside there during these proceedings. Peterson jumped up. Your Honor, my client has significant concerns about his safety if she— Safety concerns? Judge Williams interrupted. What evidence do you have that Mrs. Barnes poses any threat to your client's safety? Well, Your Honor, the emotional volatility that often accompanies— Mr. Peterson, I'm going to stop you right there. Are you seriously arguing that a woman who spent 4 days in the hospital with a brain condition poses a physical threat to your healthy adult male client? Because if that's your argument, I'd like to see some evidence. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft clicking of the court reporter's keys. Kathy realized she was holding her breath, waiting for the judge's decision that would determine whether she'd have a home to return to and money to survive on. Judge Williams reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity before speaking. Here's what I'm ordering effective immediately. Mr. Barnes will restore full access to all marital accounts within 48 hours. Mrs. Barnes will receive temporary spousal support of $3,500 per month, with the first payment due within a week. Kathy felt tears of relief beginning to form, but Judge Williams wasn't finished. Mr. Barnes will provide keys to the marital home to Mrs. Barnes within 24 hours and will not interfere with her access to the property. He will also continue paying the mortgage, homeowner's insurance, and all utilities associated with the marital home. Additionally, the judge continued, her voice growing stern, I'm ordering a forensic accounting investigation of all marital assets for the 6 months preceding Mrs. Barnes' hospitalization. If additional hidden assets or improper transfers are discovered, Mr. Barnes will face potential contempt of court charges.
Peterson tried one more time. Your Honor, we respectfully request that any return to the marital home be supervised or delayed until— Mr. Peterson, your client changed the locks on his wife while she was hospitalized. He doesn't get to dictate the terms of her return to her own home. Motion denied. Judge Williams turned directly to Marcus, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his expensive suit. Mr. Barnes, I want to be very clear about something. Your conduct in this matter has been reprehensible. You took advantage of your wife's medical emergency to execute a plan that was clearly designed to leave her financially devastated and homeless. That behavior stops now." "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus managed to say, his voice barely audible. "You have 24 hours to provide keys to the marital home. You have 48 hours to restore account access. You have 1 week to make the first spousal support payment. If you fail to comply with any of these orders, you'll be held in contempt, and I will consider criminal referrals for theft and financial abuse." As the judge gathered her papers and left the courtroom, Kathy felt a surge of vindication she hadn't expected. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone in authority had looked at Marcus's actions and called them exactly what they were: cruel, calculated, and potentially criminal. Rebecca was already gathering their documents and preparing to leave, but Kathy found herself watching Marcus across the aisle. He was slumped in his chair, looking defeated in a way she'd never seen before. His expensive attorney was speaking to him in urgent, hushed tones, probably explaining the implications of the judge's ruling. "How do you feel?" Rebecca asked as they walked toward the courthouse exit. "Vindicated," I said. "For the first time in a week, I feel like someone believes me about how wrong this all is." Judge Williams doesn't mess around with financial abuse cases. She's seen too many men try to destroy their wives financially as a negotiation tactic. As they reached the courthouse steps, Kathy's phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting it to be Jessica asking about the hearing results, she was surprised to see Derek Morrison's name. "Heard about court today through the office grapevine. Wanted you to know that a lot of us are disgusted by what Marcus did. Also thought you should know he's been telling people at work that you're having a mental breakdown, and that's why he had to protect himself. Thought you should be aware of the narrative he's spreading." I showed the message to Rebecca, who read it with a grim expression. "He's trying to control the story, make himself look like the victim. Unfortunately, that's also standard behavior." "What do I do about it?" "Nothing for now. Actions speak louder than words, and a judge just ruled that his actions were reprehensible. But we'll document this in case we need to address defamation later." As they drove back to Rebecca's office to discuss next steps, Kathy felt something she hadn't experienced in over a week: hope. The legal system had worked. Judge Williams had seen through Marcus's manipulation and Peterson's legal maneuvering to the truth of what had happened. "So what happens now?" I asked as we settled back in Rebecca's office. "Now we wait for Marcus to comply with the judge's orders. If he doesn't, we file contempt motions and things get much worse for him. If he does comply, we move forward with asset discovery and start building our case for the final divorce decree." "How long does the whole process take?" "In Arizona, assuming cooperation from both parties, about 6 months, minimum. But given Marcus's behavior so far, I'm expecting him to fight every step of the way. Plan for a year-long battle." A year? I tried to imagine still being in legal proceedings with Marcus next summer, still fighting over every asset and every detail of their failed marriage. It felt overwhelming, but also manageable in a way it hadn't before today's court victory. "There's something else we need to discuss," Rebecca said, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "The judge ordered forensic accounting, which means we're going to discover everything Marcus has been hiding. But that also means we need to prepare for the possibility that there's more bad news coming." "Like what?" "Hidden accounts, transferred property, debts you don't know about. Men who plan strategic divorces often create financial time bombs that don't explode until discovery. We need to be ready for anything." As Kathy left Rebecca's office that afternoon, she felt like a different person than the woman who'd entered the courthouse that morning. She had legal protection now, court orders ensuring her access to money and housing, and a judge who'd clearly seen Marcus's behavior for what it really was: cruel, calculated, and potentially criminal. The woman walking out of downtown Phoenix that afternoon was not the same woman Marcus had locked out of her home. She was stronger, wiser, and absolutely determined to make sure he regretted underestimating her. Tomorrow, she would have keys to her own home again. Within a week, she'd have access to money for survival and legal fees. And within months, she'd be free from the man who'd shown her just how cruel, calculated betrayal could be. The woman walking out of downtown Phoenix that afternoon was not the same woman Marcus had locked out of her home. She was stronger, wiser, and absolutely determined to make sure he regretted underestimating her.
Thursday afternoon at 2:47 p.m., exactly 23 hours and 17 minutes after Judge Williams issued her order, Marcus Barnes stood on the front porch of 2847 Cypress Street, holding a small envelope containing 2 shiny new keys. Kathy watched him through Jessica's car window from across the street, studying the man she'd once planned to grow old with as he fumbled with what appeared to be a prepared speech. Rebecca Martinez had insisted on being present for the key exchange, both as a witness and to ensure Marcus complied with the court order without creating additional drama. She approached Marcus with the cool professionalism that had served Kathy so well in court the day before. "Mr. Barnes," Rebecca said formally, "I trust these are keys to all the locks you installed?" "Front door, back door, and the side gate," Marcus replied, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Everything's there." "And the alarm system code?" Marcus hesitated. "I'd change that too. The new code is 0817, our wedding date." The irony of using their wedding date as a security code while simultaneously destroying their marriage wasn't lost on anyone present. Kathy felt a bitter laugh catch in her throat, but she maintained her composure as Rebecca inspected the keys and tested them in the locks. "These appear to be in order," Rebecca announced. "Mrs. Barnes will be taking possession of the house immediately." Marcus looked past Rebecca toward the car where Kathy sat, and for a moment, his carefully constructed facade cracked. She saw something in his expression that might have been regret or perhaps just frustration that his plan hadn't worked as smoothly as he had anticipated. "Kathy," Marcus called out, taking a step toward Jessica's car, "can we please just talk for 5 minutes without the lawyers?" Rebecca moved to block his path. "Mr. Barnes, the court order was very clear about direct communication. Everything goes through attorneys now." "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, his voice rising. "We're adults. We should be able to have a conversation about our marriage without legal supervision." "Your client forfeited the right to private conversations when he chose to change locks and steal marital assets," Rebecca replied coolly. "If he has something to communicate to Mrs. Barnes, he can call my office." Kathy watched this exchange from the safety of Jessica's car, marveling at how much had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, Marcus's opinion was the most important thing in her world. Now, watching him argue with her attorney about his lost access to her, she felt nothing but a distant sadness for the marriage that had apparently been an illusion. Marcus climbed into his car, a sleek black BMW that Kathy had never seen before, and drove away without looking back. Another piece of evidence that he'd been planning his new life for much longer than anyone had realized. "Ready to go home?" Rebecca asked Jessica's car. Home. The word felt strange and loaded with new meaning. This wasn't the same home Kathy had left 9 days ago when she'd driven to work with a headache. This was a house that had been weaponized against her, transformed from a sanctuary into a symbol of betrayal. But it was also her house, bought with her income and improved with her labor, and she was determined to reclaim it. Jessica parked in the driveway and the 3 women approached the front door together. Kathy inserted the new key with hands that trembled slightly, and the lock turned smoothly. The front door opened onto a scene that made her stomach drop. The house was empty. Not completely empty, but stripped of everything that had made it feel like a home. The living room furniture was gone except for 1 chair and a small side table. The artwork they'd chosen together had been removed from the walls, leaving behind faint outlines and nail holes. The kitchen still contained basic appliances, but Marcus had taken their dishes, their glassware, their coffee maker, even the ceramic camera mug he'd bought her in Portland. "Son of a bitch!" Jessica breathed, taking in the systematic removal of their shared possessions. Rebecca was already making notes on her legal pad. "This is why we documented everything with photos before he had access. He can't claim these items were his separate property." Kathy walked through her own home like a stranger, cataloging what remained and what had vanished. In the bedroom, Marcus had taken their bed, leaving only the dresser that had belonged to Kathy before their marriage. The closet was particularly painful. All of his clothes were gone, naturally, but he'd also taken several items that were clearly hers, including the gray sweater she'd asked him to bring to the hospital. "He took my sweater," she said aloud, the pettiness of it hitting her harder than the missing furniture.
The one I specifically asked him in the hospital, he took it just to hurt me. In what had been Marcus's home office, every piece of technology was gone. Computer, printer, even the surge protector strips. But he'd left behind a stack of bills and financial documents, clearly things he didn't want to deal with anymore. The sunroom that had been Kathy's creative space was the most devastating. Her easel remained, but Marcus had taken her art supplies, her completed paintings, even the small radio she'd used while working. He'd left behind only a few tubes of dried paint in her sketchbooks, perhaps because they had no resale value. This is calculated psychological warfare, Rebecca observed, making more notes. He didn't just take valuable items, he took things with emotional significance. That's going to work against him when we get to court. As they completed their tour of the gutted house, Kathy felt a strange mixture of violation and determination. Marcus had tried to make the house inhabitable, to force her to admit defeat and accept whatever settlement he offered. Instead, his actions had clarified something important. This wasn't about dividing assets fairly. This was about winning and losing, and Marcus was determined to make sure she lost everything. "What's our recourse?" Kathy asked Rebecca as they stood in the empty living room.
Several options. First, we document everything with photos and create a detailed inventory. Then we file a motion demanding return of marital property. The judge specifically ordered that Marcus not interfere with your use of the house, and removing all the furniture certainly qualifies as interference. How long will that take? We can file an emergency motion tomorrow, probably get a hearing within a week, but honestly, Kathy, this is going to be a pattern. Every court order we get, Marcus is going to find a way to comply with the letter of the law while violating the spirit. We need to be prepared for a long campaign. Jessica had been quietly exploring the house and returned with a discovery. "Kath, you need to see the garage." In the garage, Marcus had left behind a collection of items that told a different story. Boxes labeled Kathy's Things in his handwriting contained belongings he'd obviously sorted through and deemed worthless. Old college textbooks, holiday decorations, kitchen gadgets that had seen better days. But mixed in with the obvious discards were items of clear value. Family photos, jewelry, and her grandmother's china set. He was going through my things, Kathy realized, opening box after box, deciding what I deserve to keep. "Take pictures of everything," Rebecca instructed. "This shows premeditation and deliberate intent to control what you had access to." As they documented the garage's contents, Kathy found a manila folder that made her blood run cold. Inside were copies of her medical records from Phoenix General Hospital, including her discharge summary and doctor's notes about her condition. "Why would he have copies of my medical records?" she asked Rebecca. Rebecca examined the documents with a troubled expression. "These look like they were obtained for legal purposes. My guess is his attorney advised him to gather evidence that you were mentally or physically incapacitated during the time he was taking these actions." Evidence for what? To argue that he was acting in your best interests, protecting assets while you were unable to make sound decisions. It's a common tactic when someone has been caught stealing marital property. The discovery of her medical records felt like another violation, perhaps worse than the missing furniture. Marcus had taken her most vulnerable moments and turned them into legal ammunition against her. As the afternoon wore on, they worked systematically through the house, documenting every missing item and every manipulative detail of Marcus's property removal. Jessica made trips to Target and Walmart, buying basic necessities so Kathy could actually live in the house. Cleaning supplies, toilet paper, a few plates and cups, basic bedding for the air mattress Rebecca had insisted they purchase. "I feel like I'm camping in my own home," Kathy said as they inflated the air mattress in what used to be the master bedroom. "It's temporary," Jessica assured her. "We'll get your stuff back, and if we don't, we'll buy new stuff with money from the divorce settlement." But as evening approached and Jessica and Rebecca prepared to leave, Kathy faced the reality of spending her first night alone in the house that had been turned into a crime scene of emotional warfare.
Every empty room echoed with memories of the life she had thought she was building with Marcus. Every missing item represented another small betrayal, another way he'd tried to hurt her. "Are you sure you want to stay here tonight? You're welcome at my place for as long as you need," Jessica asked. "No," Kathy said firmly. "This is my house. I'm not letting him drive me away from my own home." After her friends left, Kathy sat on the air mattress in the empty bedroom, eating takeout Chinese food with plastic utensils Jessica had bought. The house felt cavernous and strange, filled with shadows and the echoes of her own footsteps. But gradually, as the evening progressed, she began to feel something unexpected. Peace. For the first time in over a week, she was in control of her environment. She could set the thermostat where she wanted it. She could watch whatever she chose on the small television Jessica had brought from her spare room. She could make plans for tomorrow without worrying about Marcus's schedule or mood. The house might be empty of furniture, but it was also empty of his presence, his lies, and his manipulation. As she prepared for bed on the air mattress, Kathy looked around the bare bedroom and made a decision. She wasn't just going to survive Marcus's betrayal and move on with her life. She was going to rebuild everything he tried to destroy, and she was going to make it better than it had been before. Marcus thought he'd stripped away her foundation and left her with nothing. Instead, he'd given her the opportunity to build something new, something that belonged entirely to her. For the first time since this nightmare began, Kathy Barnes fell asleep feeling genuinely hopeful about her future.
6 months later, Kathy Barnes stood in the kitchen of her Cypress Street home, brewing coffee in a new French press while sunlight streamed through windows she'd recently decorated with plants and cheerful curtains. The house that Marcus had tried to turn into a monument to her defeat had been transformed into something entirely her own, brighter, more colorful, and filled with the kind of personal touches that reflected her true personality rather than the compromised aesthetic of a shared life. The final divorce decree had been signed 3 weeks earlier, ending what Rebecca Martinez had accurately predicted would be a year-long legal battle. The forensic accounting investigation had uncovered exactly what they'd suspected. Marcus had hidden additional assets, opened secret credit cards, and even attempted to transfer ownership of their house to his brother temporarily, a maneuver that had backfired spectacularly when Judge Williams discovered it during asset discovery. Attempting to defraud the court is never a winning strategy, Rebecca had observed dryly when Marcus's latest scheme was revealed. The judge had been so incensed by the attempted property transfer that she'd awarded Kathy the house outright, along with 70% of their other marital assets and 3 years of rehabilitative alimony. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the woman Kathy had become through the process of fighting back. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Still on for our celebration dinner tonight? I made reservations at the Phoenician, the same restaurant where you were going to celebrate your anniversary." Kathy smiled at the irony. Tonight, instead of celebrating 4 years of marriage to Marcus, she'd be celebrating 1 year of freedom from him. The anniversary of her divorce had arrived with none of the sadness she'd expected and all of the satisfaction she'd hoped for. As she prepared for work at Henderson Marketing Solutions, where she'd recently been promoted to creative director following the stunning success of her post-divorce portfolio, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The legal battle had revealed depths of Marcus's deception that continued to shock her, even now. Beyond the obvious financial theft, they'd discovered he'd been having an affair with a coworker in Denver for nearly 6 months before filing for divorce. The evening runs had been meetings with Sarah Mitchell, a software developer at Dataflow's Denver office, who'd apparently been part of his relocation plan all along. "He was literally building a new life with another woman while you were planning anniversary dinners," Rebecca had said when the affair came to light during depositions. "Some people really are that calculating." The most stunning revelation had come when Derek Morrison, still feeling guilty about his complicity in Marcus's deception, had finally revealed the full scope of what he'd known. Marcus hadn't just planned to leave Kathy, he'd planned to destroy her reputation and financial security so thoroughly that she'd never be able to recover. He told me he was going to make sure you couldn't afford to fight the divorce, Derek had admitted during his deposition. Said if he took enough money and made things difficult enough, you'd have to accept whatever settlement he offered. But Marcus had underestimated both Kathy's resilience and the legal system's ability to punish financial abuse. His attempts to hide assets resulted in perjury charges. His systematic theft of marital property led to criminal prosecution for fraud, and his affair with Sarah Mitchell had cost him any sympathy the court might have had for his claims of marital unhappiness. The final court hearing had been a masterpiece of legal consequences. Judge Williams, clearly disgusted by the evidence of Marcus's calculated cruelty, had delivered a ruling that left him financially devastated and professionally humiliated. Mr. Barnes, the judge had said during the final hearing, your conduct throughout these proceedings has demonstrated a level of premeditation and malice that goes far beyond ordinary marital discord. You didn't just want to end your marriage, you wanted to destroy your wife's ability to survive without you. That behavior has consequences. Those consequences had been severe. In addition to the lopsided asset division, Marcus had been ordered to pay Kathy's legal fees, a total that had reached nearly $75,000 by the end of the proceedings. He'd also been criminally prosecuted for fraud and received 2 years of probation, along with an order to pay restitution for the money he'd stolen. Perhaps most satisfying for Kathy, his employer had learned about the affair and the criminal charges. Dataflow Innovations had terminated his employment, and his attempts to find comparable work in the tech industry had been hampered by the public record of his legal troubles. He basically destroyed his own career to hurt you, Jessica had observed, and it didn't even work. Now, as Kathy prepared to leave for another successful day at work, she marveled at how completely her life had changed. The woman who once defined herself through her marriage had discovered strengths and capabilities she'd never known she possessed. Her art, which had been relegated to a hobby during her marriage, had flourished during the divorce proceedings as a form of therapy and self-expression. She'd recently sold several pieces at a local gallery and was planning her first solo exhibition for the fall. Her social life had expanded beyond the couple's activities that had dominated her time with Marcus. She joined a hiking group, taken cooking classes, and even started learning Spanish, things she'd always wanted to do, but had somehow never prioritized during her marriage. Her doorbell rang as she was gathering her things for work. Through the peephole, she could see a delivery driver holding a large floral arrangement. The flowers were from her parents, who'd driven down from Flagstaff the previous weekend to help her celebrate the anniversary of her divorce. "We're so proud of the woman you've become," her mother had said during their visit. "Marcus tried to break you, but instead he revealed how strong you really are." The card with the flowers read, "To our daughter who turned betrayal into triumph. Love, Mom and Dad." As Kathy drove to work, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she'd been devastated by the discovery that her perfect marriage was a lie. She'd felt like a failure, like someone whose judgment couldn't be trusted, like a victim of circumstances beyond her control. Now, she understood that Marcus's betrayal hadn't been about her inadequacy. It had been about his own moral bankruptcy. His elaborate deception had revealed nothing about her worth and everything about his character. The final irony was that Marcus's attempt to destroy her had actually freed her. The marriage she thought was perfect had actually limiting her potential. Living with someone who was capable of such calculated cruelty had required her to suppress parts of herself that were now flourishing.
At work, Kathy threw herself into the Miller Electronics campaign with the passion and creativity that had earned her the promotion. Her colleagues had watched her transformation over the past year with admiration and respect. The shy, accommodating woman who'd always deferred to her husband's opinions had evolved into a confident leader whose ideas drove successful campaigns and whose judgment was sought out by clients and colleagues alike. During her lunch break, Kathy received an unexpected phone call from Derek Morrison. They'd maintained a cordial relationship after the divorce, bonded by their shared experience of Marcus's manipulation. "I thought you should know," Derek said. "Marcus tried to contact me yesterday. He's apparently struggling financially and wanted to know if Dataflow would consider rehiring him." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that his criminal record makes him unemployable in the tech industry, and that most of his former colleagues think what he did to you was unforgivable. He seemed genuinely shocked that there were consequences for his actions." Kathy felt a brief moment of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. Marcus had made his choices with full knowledge of the potential consequences. The fact that he was now facing those consequences wasn't her responsibility. "How is Sarah Mitchell handling all this?" Kathy asked, curious about the woman who'd been part of Marcus's betrayal. "That relationship imploded months ago," Derek replied. "Turns out she didn't know he was married when they started their affair. When she found out about the divorce proceedings and the criminal charges, she ended things immediately. Last I heard, she'd requested a transfer to another Dataflow office to get away from the situation." Even his affair had been built on lies. Marcus had deceived not only his wife, but also the woman he'd claimed to love enough to destroy his marriage for. That evening, as Kathy prepared for her celebration dinner with Jessica, she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror of her beautifully renovated master bedroom. The woman looking back at her was stronger, more confident, and more authentically herself than she had ever been during her marriage. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, her heart skipped as she wondered if Marcus was trying to contact her again, but the message was from someone unexpected. Sarah Mitchell. "Hi, Kathy. I know this is strange, but I wanted to reach out and apologize. I had no idea Marcus was married when we started seeing each other. What he did to you was unconscionable, and I'm sorry I was unknowingly part of it. I hope you're doing well." Kathy stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you for reaching out. I hope you've learned, as I have, that some people are capable of deceiving everyone around them. I wish you well." As she drove to meet Jessica at the Phoenician, Kathy reflected on how different this anniversary was than the one she'd planned a year ago. Instead of celebrating a marriage built on lies, she was celebrating a life built on truth. Instead of dinner with a man who'd been planning to betray her, she was having dinner with a friend who'd supported her through the darkest period of her life. The restaurant was as elegant as she'd remembered, but tonight she was paying for dinner with money she had earned and saved herself, not money that could be stolen from joint accounts by a deceptive husband. "To Kathy Barnes," Jessica raised her glass of wine as they settled into their table, "who turned the worst betrayal imaginable into the best thing that ever happened to her." As they clinked glasses, Kathy felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for Marcus's betrayal, but for her own strength in surviving it. The woman who'd been locked out of her home a year ago had unlocked possibilities she'd never imagined. "You know what the strangest part is?" Kathy said as they enjoyed their dinner. "I'm actually grateful it happened. Not grateful for the pain, but grateful for what I learned about myself. I was living a life that was too small for who I really am." Marcus had tried to destroy her, but instead he'd revealed her true strength. He'd attempted to leave her with nothing, but instead he'd forced her to discover everything she was capable of achieving on her own. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave the restaurant, Kathy realized that this was the last chapter of the Marcus Barnes story. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be the woman recovering from betrayal. She'd be the woman who'd overcome it completely. The future stretched ahead of her, full of possibilities that belonged entirely to her. Art exhibitions, career advancement, travel, new relationships built on honesty and mutual respect, all of it was waiting for a woman who'd learned she was strong enough to handle whatever life might bring. Marcus Barnes tried to write the ending of Kathy's story, but she took the pen away from him and wrote something better. And this was just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.